You're running the most advanced civilization on the planet. Then, everything falls apart. Your government collapses, your economy crashes, foreign armies invade, millions die, cities burn. For any other nation, that's the end of the story. Game over. But not China. China looks at total collapse and says, "Give us a century, we'll be back." And they mean it, because here's what's absolutely wild. China has completely collapsed at least 8 separate times in recorded history. Not just government changes, we're talking full civilizational breakdowns, the kind that erases empires from the map forever. Yet somehow, every single time, China comes back. Same language, same cultural identity, same basic structure. Like hitting reset on a video game, but keeping all your save files. No other civilization has pulled this off. Not even once. China's done it 8 times. And counting. So, what's the secret? That's what we're diving into today. Because understanding this pattern might be the key to understanding the 21st century. Let's start with context. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. That was it. Finished. The territories became different kingdoms with different languages and identities. Nobody spent the next 1,000 years trying to recreate Rome. The Persian Empire rose and fell multiple times, but each version was different. Different rulers, languages, religions. The Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Hungary, then fragmented and dissolved. Every empire follows the same pattern. They rise, peak, decline, fall, and stay fallen. Except China. Take the Han Dynasty. It collapsed around 220 AD. China shattered into 3 warring kingdoms, nearly a century of chaos. The population dropped from 60 million to maybe 16 million. 3/4 of the population gone. Any historian would say, that's the end of Chinese civilization. But it wasn't. In 581 AD, the Sui dynasty reunified China. Same writing system, same cultural memory, same bureaucratic structure. Someone just picked up the instruction manual and followed it again. This happened with every dynasty. Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing. Every time China broke into pieces, someone put it back together in the same shape. The question is why? And the answer comes down to 3 pillars that survive even when everything else collapses. The first pillar is the written language. Emperor Qin Shi Huang standardized Chinese characters across the empire over 2,000 years ago. Here's why this matters. China is huge. Different regions spoke completely different dialects. A farmer in the north and a merchant in the south couldn't have a conversation, but they could both read the same text. This created a shared cultural identity, independent of government control. When dynasties fell, the written language didn't change. A scholar in one broken kingdom could read texts from 500 years earlier. He had the same cultural references as scholars in enemy kingdoms. Compare this to Europe. When Rome fell, Latin fragmented into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. Each became its own identity. But in China, even when the country was broken into 5 kingdoms, scholars in all 5 were reading the same texts, studying the same history, sharing the same cultural memory. The written language held the instruction manual for how to rebuild. And this still works today. A modern Chinese person can read texts from 2,000 years ago and understand them. The thread hasn't broken. The second pillar is the mandate of heaven. Here's how it works. The emperor rules because heaven chose him. But if he screws up, if there are disasters, famines, rebellions, that's proof heaven withdrew its approval. Now anyone can overthrow him and claim the mandate. This creates a cycle. A strong leader unifies China and claims heaven's blessing. His dynasty rules, corruption sets in, disasters happen, rebellions start. A new guy wins and claims the mandate transferred to him. Here's what this does. It doesn't create permanent fragmentation. It creates competition for reunification. Because legitimacy only comes from ruling all of China. You're not a real emperor if you control half the territory. you're just a warlord. This means every time China broke apart, multiple factions immediately fought to put it back together. Not from love, but because their claim to power required controlling the whole thing. After Rome fell, European kings were content with separate kingdoms. But in China, the ideology demanded reunification. It created a magnetic pull. And this ideology still operates today. The Communist Party doesn't talk about the mandate of heaven explicitly, but look at how they justify their rule. They liberated China from humiliation. They made China strong. They're restoring China's rightful place. That's the mandate of heaven with different vocabulary. The third pillar is the scholar-bureaucrat class. For over 1,000 years, China ran on civil service examinations. If you wanted power, you had to pass brutally difficult exams testing Confucian classics, history, administration. This created a permanent educated class spread across the country. They all studied the same texts, believed in the same system, wanted China unified. When dynasties collapsed, this class survived. They still had the knowledge. They still remembered how things worked. When a new warlord tried to reunify China, he needed them. He couldn't run an empire alone, so he'd adopt the old system, bring back the exams, staff his government with scholars who knew the playbook. This is why Chinese governments, after every collapse, looked similar. The scholar bureaucrats were keepers of institutional memory, a civilizational hard drive that survived every crash. Now here's where it gets interesting. These three pillars don't just explain ancient history, they explain modern China. The collapse that should have ended China forever happened from 1839 to 1949. The Opium Wars, foreign occupation, the Qing dynasty's failure, warlords, Japanese invasion, civil war. For 100 years, China was collapsing. Tens of millions died. Foreign powers assumed China was finished. But in 1949, Mao and the communists hit the reset button. They unified China under central government. They reinstated powerful bureaucracy. They created a new mandate of heaven based on liberating China from humiliation. They kept the written language. They created new examinations. Study Marxist theory instead of Confucian classics. Become a party cadre instead of a scholar official. But the structure was nearly identical. The cycle repeated. Collapse, reunification, new claim to the mandate. And it's happening again now. After Mao died in 1976, China went through economic and ideological collapse. Deng Xiaoping reset again, open the economy, keep political control, restore China's power. In 40 years, China went from poorest to second largest economy. Over 800 million out of poverty. This wasn't luck. This was the pattern. So why do Chinese people keep buying into this cycle? It's about collective memory and narrative identity. China's story is cyclical, not linear. In Western thinking, history moves forward. In Chinese thinking, history is a wheel. Dynasties rise and fall. What goes down comes up. This creates resilience. When China collapses, people think, this is the part for the comeback. They've seen it 8 times before. There's also the century of humiliation. China spent the 1800s and early 1900s humiliated by foreign powers. This is taught in every school. It created a national obsession with never being weak again. That obsession drives everything. Military buildup, economic competition, technology focus. So what does this mean for 2025? Western countries keep assuming China will liberalize, become democratic, become like us. But that's not how the pattern works. China becomes more like China. The Belt and Road Initiative, recreating the ancient tributary system. Hong Kong crackdown, Taiwan pressure, South China Sea claims. About reunification and territorial integrity. The pattern demands all historically Chinese territories return to Chinese control. But here's the question. Can the pattern survive modernity? China faces new challenges. Aging population, environmental crisis, tech arms race with the US, a fragmenting global economy, young people with internet access who see alternatives. The old resets worked when China was isolated and agricultural. You had centuries to rebuild. Now everything moves faster. Information spreads instantly. Climate change doesn't respect dynasties. Centralized control worked when information moved slowly. Now one bad decision affects 1.4 billion people instantly. We're watching the most important test of the pattern. China aims for national rejuvenation by 2049. If it works, the pattern is real. If not, modernity broke the cycle. Either way, we're watching history in real time. So, what's the takeaway? Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about knowing how to get back up. China survives because it has institutional memory coded into language, ideology, and bureaucracy. When everything collapses, those three things contain the instructions for rebuilding. Most nations don't have that. They assume continuity. They don't plan for the cycle. Maybe that's the genius. Not that China never falls, but that it assumes it will and prepares for what comes after. Every empire collapses. Only one keeps returning. And now you know why. Thanks for watching. If this interested you more about China, hit that like button and share this. Subscribe to keep watching, and I'll see you in the next one.